Last time on JG Reviews. Final Fight was just one of the big beat-em-up franchises made during the 16-bit era. And next time, we'll be looking at the first game in what is considered Sega's classic beat-em-up series. Hello, I'm Joshua Gillespie, and welcome to the new episode of JG Reviews. Many of you guessed it, this week I'm going to be reviewing Streets of Rage for the Sega Genesis, one of the other big beat-em-up franchises of the 16-bit era. Now, I'm going to be comparing different aspects of the game to Final Fight for the Super Nintendo, just to see if this one holds up just as well as that one does. Now, with that out of the way, let's find out if the Streets of Rage are still walkable. What was once a happy, peaceful, productive city full of life and activity has fallen into the hands of a secret criminal syndicate. The leader of the syndicate has somehow managed to keep his identity a secret. The organization soon absorbed the city government. They even had the police force in their clutches. Looting, random violence, and destruction are rampant. No one is safe walking the streets, day or night. As the chaos continued at full strength, 3 young police officers tried to establish a special attack unit. They were repeatedly turned down by their superiors, most of whom had been bought by the organization or were too afraid to make a stand. One day, when they could no longer stand by and watch their city be demolished, they quit the force. Adam Hunter, Axel Stone, and Blaze Fielding decided to forego their careers in legal law enforcement and put their lives on the line. They are without weapons, but each possess great hand-to-hand combat abilities. Take them into the heart of the city and battle the most dangerous waves of bad dudes and chicks ever assembled. Make this city a place where people no longer have to walk the streets of rage. While that story is good, I just have to say something. Notice how the only things identified are the main playable characters. You never know the name of the town, or even the name of the organization. Yeah, they say the leader has a secret identity, but what about the other people? I know detail like that isn't necessarily important, but that's something that just bothers me about Streets of Rage. In Final Fight, while the story is somewhat basic, you at least have characters like Hagar's daughter and Belger, and it's all done by the Mad Gear Gang, and it takes place in Metro City. Also, the enemies actually have names. Yeah, they're generic names like Billy and Sid. Quit saying my name! But they at least have names. Also, the bosses, which we'll get to in a little bit, are also unnamed outside of the Japanese manual. When it comes to the story of Streets of Rage, it seems rather unimportant and is only there for people who want some sort of plot. But for people who just want to go in there and beat up enemies, they can just ignore it. The gameplay is very similar to the game Golden Axe, which was released 2 years prior, also by Sega. Enemies walk onto the screen from both sides, as well as occasionally appearing from other locations. The player must defeat each opponent to progress through 8 locations, known as rounds. Streets of Rage features a special attack, which is assistance from a police car, which will pull up at the level's left and fire explosives, taking health from all enemies. Even though you wouldn't know it because the generic enemies don't have health bars. The only way you know they're down is when they go "Argh!" Now, comparing this game to Final Fight, I do have to thank Sega for having a 2-player mode, which can actually lead to an alternate ending, which is similar to the ending of Double Dragon. As I mentioned before, the bosses are unnamed outside of the Japanese manual. But also, and this is something nitpicky I have with beat-em-ups, they reuse the same bosses as generic enemies, and sometimes they just reuse them, but just give them an extra copy. One boss in particular, I swear you can't beat without a second player. Now, I understand using the same bosses on the last or second to last level as some sort of endurance round. I'm fine with that. But every boss in Final Fight was unique, and you knew that after you stopped them, you wouldn't see them again. They were gone. Here, it just seems like they have some kind of magical cloning machine. Also, the final boss's name is Mr. X. Ooh, spooky. While the two-player mode is a big upgrade from Final Fight, the gameplay does feel a bit more repetitive. But I will admit, I do prefer the gameplay of Streets of Rage over Final Fight. Even though the enemies and bosses are all generic and are unnamed, and that one boss is freaking impossible, it's the two-player mode that just sells it for me. Plus, at the end of the game, you get to beat the crap out of each other. Spoiler alert! But yeah, I just prefer Streets of Rage gameplay over Final Fight. Now, the presentation is where these two games differ a lot. Final Fight has more of a grungy, cartoonish look, while Streets of Rage has more of a grungy, comic book look. This is mostly due to the graphical capabilities of each system. Streets of Rage is a much darker game. The music between the two differs also. Final Fight has more of a hard rock sound, and Streets of Rage has more of a smooth rock sound. And the music of Streets of Rage, in my opinion, is kind of forgettable when comparing it to Final Fight. There's just nothing that stood out to me. Also, the graphics of Final Fight, in my opinion, are much more appealing to look at. But it all depends on what you prefer, and I personally prefer the hard rock cartoonish look of Final Fight. At the title screen of Streets of Rage, move the cursor down to Options and hold A, B, C, and right on the second controller and press Start on controller 1. This will take you to the Options menu and you'll have two new options: Players and Level Select. That's about it. Whoopee! So, Final Fight and Streets of Rage, two of the biggest beat-em-up franchises of the 16-bit era. Both left a big impact on gamers, but what did they go on to? Final Fight went on to have two 16-bit sequels, an 8-bit remake of the first game, a 3D fighting game, and an interesting 3D game. But after that, the characters have been featured in numerous fighting games such as Street Fighter and Marvel vs. Capcom. Streets of Rage also had two 16-bit sequels, albeit with some interesting choices, but after 1994, there hasn't been a new Streets of Rage. There have been a couple attempts over the years to revive the series, but they were unsuccessful, and the characters have yet to appear in any other Sega game, so it seems as though this series has been forgotten, unless Sega is doing another release of Genesis games onto modern home consoles. Similar to Final Fight, you can find the Streets of Rage games on almost any platform. The three games were recently released as a pack on Xbox Live Arcade, and you can find them on Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection compilation. It's actually kind of sad. Yeah, the series ended, but it seems as though Sega has kind of forgotten about this franchise. Anyway, both of these games are fantastic, and I highly recommend them. You can find them pretty cheap, and they come on most compilation discs. They're two beat-em-ups that still hold up. Now, next time, I want to review something different, a genre I haven't reviewed before. I want to review a puzzle game. What's this? Ah, damn it.